If you ever find yourself hiking deep in the Smoky Mountains and you happen to stumble upon a small wooden doll leaning against a tree, stop right there. Turn around immediately. Do not touch it with your hands. Do not ask yourself why it is sitting there in the middle of nowhere. Just leave that place as quickly as you can. Welcome back. This is where the past is never truly dead. It is just hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. Each and every day, we dig up the forgotten stories, the covered-up truths, and the unspeakable events that lie buried beneath everyday lives. What you are about to hear is not just another story to entertain you. It is a warning, a real warning. This is the disturbing history of the Walker Sisters and the silence that hangs over Wye Hollow like a heavy blanket. A story filled with isolation, dark secrets, and the kind of darkness that grows when no one is watching or paying attention. Picture this in your mind. A stretch of mountains so far away from civilization, so completely covered in thick mist and fog that even the daylight feels dim and muted. The locals called it Wye Hollow, a name that never once appeared on any tourist maps. It was a name that rarely, if ever, passed through local people's lips. But deep in these dark woods, legends whisper about 6 sisters who lived their lives by rules that no one else could understand. They kept promises that no one else dared to question or challenge. It all began during a time when Appalachia was already struggling just to survive and breathe. The Great Depression had reached its long fingers into every hollow and valley. Most families in the area either starved to death or packed up and left for the cities to find work. But the Walker family stayed behind. They did not just stay in place, though. They retreated further and further away from society. Mile by mile, step by step, they pulled themselves away from the world around them. Eventually, only the mountains themselves knew their names. At first, the local folks thought it was grief and sadness that drove the Walker family to such extreme isolation. After all, their father, John Walker, had been a respected man in the community. He was a hard-working farmer, a skilled craftsman, and a father to 11 children. But by the cold winter of 1921, death had hollowed out the family like rot eating away at a tree from the inside. 2 sons were lost to fever and sickness. A mother was buried in the ground too soon, far before her time. And then came scandal, the kind that burned like a quiet fire through the church pews and the town gossip. The remaining daughters, 6 of them in total, clung to one another as if blood was the only lifeline they had left in this world. But John Walker left more behind than just land and property. He left words, specific instructions carved into the last pages of his personal journal like they were holy scripture meant to be followed forever. The words read clearly, "Blood is the only true bond. Those not of our blood cannot be trusted, for they do not share our suffering, nor do they share our destiny." Those words became their law, their rule book for living, and laws that develop in isolation, cut off from the rest of the world, have a terrible way of hardening and transforming into something else entirely, something monstrous and unnatural. Before we continue deeper into this story and uncover its unspeakable secrets, I want to ask you something very important. This channel is not designed for everyone who stumbles across it. Only the bravest souls who dare to confront and face the darkest chapters of American history should be here. If you have made it this far into the story, you are not like most people out there. You understand that some truths are simply too horrifying to ignore, no matter how much they disturb us or make us uncomfortable. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community of true mystery seekers and truth hunters, and tell me down in the comments what state you are listening from right now. Are you brave enough to hear a story like this one coming from your own backyard, from your own home state? Because the deeper we go into Wye Hollow, the darker and more disturbing it gets with each step forward. To truly understand the darkness that consumed Wye Hollow, you have to start with the man who planted its first seed of evil. That man was John Walker. The Walker family name once carried real weight and respect in Cades Cove County. John was not just another ordinary mountain farmer struggling to get by. He was a man that people trusted with their lives. He was a carpenter with rough, calloused hands and a solid reputation for honesty and fairness. He taught lessons at the local schoolhouse to the children. He sang hymns with a voice that carried through the entire valley and echoed off the mountains. He even preached from the pulpit on Sundays when the regular pastor was sick or ill. But the man who returned home from the Civil War in 1865 was not the same man who eventually died in 1921. Something broke deep inside of him during those years. It did not happen all at once in a single moment. It was slower than that, more gradual, like water steadily wearing down stone over many years. At first, the changes in John's personality seemed like simple grief and mourning. Diphtheria, a terrible disease, had swept through the mountains during the 1890s. It took 3 of John's youngest children in one single cruel winter. Then Margaret, his beloved wife, fell seriously ill. Some people said it was a stroke that took her ability to speak. Others whispered about something worse, something that was done behind closed doors where no one could see. She never spoke clearly again for the rest of her life. After that tragedy, John stopped coming to town except when he absolutely had to go. Then came the murder that shocked everyone. A neighboring farmer ended up dead in a violent dispute over land boundaries. John's oldest son, William, was charged with the crime but later acquitted based on self-defense. Still, the scandal and shame burned away the last bridges the family had left with their community. People in Cades Cove County began crossing the street to avoid them when they saw a Walker coming their way. By 1900, the Walkers had become like ghosts at church socials and community gatherings. Their names were whispered quietly, not spoken out loud. Isolation did not just happen to them by accident. It became a deliberate choice that John made for his family. He pushed the family deeper and deeper into Y Hollow, moving them past the reach of gossip and rumors, past the laws that governed everyone else in society. By 1910, they were almost entirely self-sufficient, needing nothing from the outside world. And John, growing older and more bitter with each passing year, began to write everything down. His journals, which were later found tucked away in a forgotten archive, read like scripture for a religion that only one family followed. The words he wrote were chilling. The world beyond our boundaries grows more corrupt and evil each year that passes. Our family stands alone in righteousness and purity. We must preserve our purity at all costs, no matter what we have to do. By his last winter on earth, his handwriting trembled and shook on the page, but his orders and commands did not waver at all. He wrote clearly, "Remain together as one unit. Do not sell the land under any circumstances. Never trust outsiders who come here. And above all else, keep the family secrets as carefully as you would keep your own soul safe." What were those secrets he kept referring to? He never wrote them out plainly in clear language, but there are hints scattered throughout his journals, chilling fragments of thoughts about tests of loyalty, about keeping the blood pure and untainted, and about something he called the promise. When John Walker was buried in the frozen ground of Y Hollow in 1921, 6 daughters stood together at his grave in the bitter cold. Their names were Louisa, Martha, Hetty, Josephine, Sarah, and Jane. The men in the family were gone now, either dead or scattered to the winds. And those 6 women standing there, they obeyed his every word as if it were law. From that moment forward, the Walker sisters turned completely inward, away from the world. No church attendance, no visitors allowed, no world beyond the ridge, just 6 sisters bound together by blood, by grief, and by a father's command that would become their law and their curse for decades to come. After John Walker's death in 1921, the homestead did not die with him as most people expected. Instead, it hardened like concrete. The 6 Walker sisters took his written words like they were scripture from the Bible. They rarely ventured beyond their hollow anymore. The trails that once connected their world to Cades Cove grew wild and overgrown, completely choked by thick roots and thorns. It was as if the land itself wanted them cut off from civilization. Locals in the area began to whisper quietly that the Walker women did not need the outside world anymore. They had everything they required up there in the mountains. They had food from their garden, they had water from the spring, and they had each other. At first, people felt sorry for them and pitied their situation. 6 women alone in those harsh mountains, working the soil with their bare hands until they bled, hauling heavy buckets of water from the spring, spinning wool by dim lamplight while the rest of the world roared into the jazz age with parties and modern conveniences. But that pity slowly turned into unease and fear when the sisters stopped coming to town altogether. By the mid-1920s, sightings of the sisters were rare and deeply unsettling when they did occur. A hunter would catch a brief glimpse of black dresses moving like shadows between the trees. A child fetching water at the creek swore on his life that he saw a figure watching him from the ridge. The figure stood motionless and completely silent, with eyes that did not blink even once. The sisters began selling their handmade baskets and quilts through intermediaries, middlemen who would handle the transactions. They would leave goods at a designated spot near Cades Creek and pick up cash later. No words exchanged, no thanks given, just goods left behind and then gone. People started calling them the Hollow Witches. Not because they cast spells or made charms, but because they had vanished from ordinary life and taken on the quality of something other, something not quite human anymore. But the real unease and fear began during winter. When the snow fell thick and heavy, and the game animals grew scarce and hard to find, odd things started happening in the area. Dogs disappeared from neighboring farms without a trace. A trapper claimed he lost half of a deer carcass overnight, dragged away by something incredibly strong. There were no animal prints in the snow, but there were human ones leading toward Y Hollow. Still, no one spoke about it out loud. Not yet anyway. This was Appalachia, a land that respected privacy and minded its own business, even when privacy stank of something deeply wrong. Then, in January of 1927, a schoolteacher named Grace Atkins failed to return from a visit to see a friend across the ridge. Search parties combed through the trails methodically. They searched high and low. They found absolutely nothing. No blood, no tracks. No scraps of clothing. The mountain had swallowed her whole, or something else had taken her. 2 weeks later, a hunter stumbled upon a clearing deep in Y Hollow. In the center of the clearing stood a crude wooden figure, a doll about 2 feet tall, carved from a single piece of timber. Its face was a blank oval with no features at all, but someone had pressed strands of real hair into its scalp, human hair. Pinned to its chest with a hand-forged nail was a strip of gingham fabric. It was the same exact pattern that Grace Atkins had been wearing on the day she vanished without a trace. The hunter fled the scene before dusk could fall, but not before he noted something far worse than the doll itself. There were 6 pairs of footprints in the snow, circling that doll in a perfect pattern like some kind of ritual had taken place. He never spoke of what he saw publicly to reporters or officials. He only told his brother in a hushed, terrified voice with a clear warning. Do not go anywhere near Y Hollow. They are not right up there. Something is very wrong. From that winter onward, the mountain's silence grew heavier and more oppressive. And the Walker sisters were no longer just women living alone in isolation. They had become something else now, something darker. They had become guardians of a secret so dark and terrible that it would take decades for the first truth to claw its way into daylight. Next, we uncover the first official disappearance that pulled the sheriff up to Y Hollow against his better judgment. The first emergency call came in on a brittle, cold morning in February of 1927. Sheriff Robert Delmore was pouring his second cup of hot coffee when the terrible news reached him at his office. The Atkins girl never made it home safely. Grace Atkins was not some drifter or stranger passing through. She was a respected schoolteacher in the community. People noticed immediately when someone like that did not return home. Her friend had seen her leave just after noon, bundled up in her blue gingham dress and a heavy wool coat for warmth. The ridge trail she took should have led her home safely before the sun dropped behind the mountains. But Grace never arrived at her destination. By the time Sheriff Delmore rode out on horseback toward Y Hollow, a thin crust of snow crackled loudly under his horse's hooves. The woods surrounding him were eerily still and quiet. Even the birds had fallen completely silent. Search parties had already combed through the ridge without any luck. No torn fabric caught on branches. No blood staining the snow. Not even a scuff in the snow to suggest any kind of struggle had taken place. That fact did not sit right with Delmore's gut instinct. In these mountains, a cougar might take a lamb from a farm, but not a full-grown woman without leaving some kind of mark or evidence behind. And there was something else bothering him deeply. The whispers he kept hearing. Folks were saying that the Walker sisters knew something about Grace's disappearance. He did not want to believe it at all. He knew the Walkers, or at least he thought he did. He had grown up not far from them as a boy. He had seen them in town, seen them at the market. They were quiet but polite, selling their handmade baskets with their father at market. 6 sisters, all dressed in dark homespun dresses, lined up like fence posts in a row, heads bowed down respectfully, while old John Walker handled all the talking and business. After John died, they had drawn inward like a snapped shutter closing tight. Still, they had never caused any real trouble before. Not until now, anyway. The sheriff tethered his horse at the hollow's edge and followed a narrow, winding path up through black pine trees. The deeper he went into the woods, the colder it felt, the kind of bone, deep cold that gets inside your body and will not leave. He noticed something very odd about the trail as he walked. There were no fresh prints in the snow except his own. Yet the smoke curling up from the cabin chimney told him clearly that the sisters were home inside. The homestead appeared suddenly through the trees without warning. A squat, weather-beaten cabin hunched against the slope like it was trying to hide itself from view. The yard was completely empty. No dogs barking. No hens scratching in the dirt looking for food. Just silence, thick and heavy. Delmore mounted the creaking porch steps and knocked firmly on the door. The sound seemed to vanish into the wood as if absorbed. After a long, uncomfortable moment, the door finally opened just a crack. A woman's face appeared in the gap. Her skin was pale as milk. Her eyes were dark as coal. It was Louisa, the eldest sister. She did not smile or show any expression at all. "Morning, Sheriff," she said in a flat, emotionless voice. He asked her directly about Grace Atkins and her disappearance. Louisa blinked slowly, as if carefully weighing each word before speaking. "Ain't seen her," she said simply. "Ain't seen nobody up here." Behind her in the darkness, shadows moved. Figures dressed in black drifted like smoke between the walls of the cabin. The air inside smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old blood dried on iron. Delmore felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise up. He did not step inside the cabin. He did not want to, not for any reason. As he turned to leave and head back down the mountain, Louisa spoke again. Her voice was soft but sharp as a blade cutting through the air. "Some things get lost in these mountains, Sheriff. Sometimes it is better not to look too hard for them." He rode back to town before dark could fall. He said nothing to the search party about what he had seen or what he had felt in that cabin. But that night, as he sat alone by the fire in his home, one question kept circling in his mind like a buzzard circling something dead. What in God's name are those women hiding up there in that hollow? The mountains give back what they take, but they never return things whole and undamaged. It was March when the spring thaw began in earnest. The search for Grace Atkins shifted from hope to dread and horror. The creek ran high and brown with meltwater, loosening secrets that the snow had buried for weeks. That is when a young boy from Cades Cove, out checking his father's animal traps, saw something snagged on a fallen log in the water. At first he thought it was a deer hide pale and waterlogged from being in the creek. Then the current rolled it over slightly, and a face turned toward him. Or what was left of one. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later after being summoned. The body lay on the muddy bank, tangled up in roots like the mountain did not want to give it up easily. The flesh was white and bloated from the water. The eyes were gone, taken by fish or decay. The lips were chewed away by fish. But the worst part was not what the water had done to the body over time. It was what someone had done to it first, before it went into the water. Both legs were missing from the thigh down, cut clean off. The cuts were too clean and precise for rocks or animals to have made them. Delmore knelt down beside the body, his jaw tight with anger and horror. His breath came out as a ghost in the cold air. The gingham dress left no doubt in anyone's mind who this was. Grace Atkins had come out of the mountain, but not whole, not in one piece. The coroner confirmed what the sheriff already knew in his gut. Those cuts on the legs were deliberate. Someone had taken her legs on purpose, and the body had been in the water less than a week, which meant she had somehow survived for days, maybe even weeks, after first vanishing. The news spread like wildfire through the surrounding coves and valleys. Men who had shrugged off the whispers and rumors now nailed their doors shut at night. Women stopped sending their children alone to fetch water from the creek. And every story, every theory that people came up with, circled back to one place: Wye Hollow. Delmore returned to the Walker homestead with determination. This time he did not knock softly and politely. He hammered his fist against that grey door until it swung open hard enough to rattle the hinges violently. Louisa stood there in the doorway, calm as a corpse, showing no emotion. Behind her, the other sisters loomed in the gloom like shadows pinned to the walls. He told her exactly what they had found in the creek. He watched her eyes carefully for any reaction. Nothing?
Nothing. Sorrow, not surprise.
Just that flat black gaze deep enough to drown in if you look too long. "We ain't done nothing wrong," she said. Her voice was steady and calm, but her hands were wet from the sink, dripping with water from the creek. Delmore did not ask about the water on her hands, because then he saw something that made his blood run cold. On the hearth near the dying fire sat a shape. It was small and wooden, a doll, the same size and the same crude carving as the one the hunter had described finding in the clearing. Only this one wore something different. A tiny strip of blue gingham tied around it like an apron. Delmore left before dark could fall over the hollow. He did not take the doll as evidence. Later, he would tell himself he did not have enough legal cause to take it. Not yet, anyway. The truth was that something deep inside him balked at the idea of touching it with his bare hands. That night, the sheriff sat awake in his home with his gun laid across his knees, listening to the wind claw at the windows like something trying to get in. He thought of Grace. He thought of her legs cut clean off her body. He thought of Louisa's hands dripping water in a house that had no well nearby. And for the first time in his entire life, Robert Delmore prayed. But he did not pray for justice. He prayed for the strength to keep going back up that mountain when duty called him. After Grace Atkins came out of the creek in pieces, Wye Hollow should have emptied completely. The sisters should have been dragged from that house by force and locked behind iron bars. But the mountains have rules of their own that do not follow the laws of men, and one of those rules is silence. Sheriff Delmore filed his official report, but it read like a whisper instead of a scream. There were no arrests made, no headlines in the newspapers. The Knoxville papers ran a single column on page 6. Local woman missing body recovered. No mention of the missing legs, no mention of Wye Hollow at all. People in Cades Cove muttered under their breath, though. They muttered quietly when old Jasper Reed vanished while walking home from the mill. They muttered when Caleb Turner's dog came back without him, its muzzle sticky with blood. 2 men gone in a single summer. And then a 4th person vanished, a peddler from Maryville who never reached his next stop. Folks searched for them, but searching Wye Hollow was like wading into black water. The deeper you went, the colder it got, and the harder it became to see anything clearly. Delmore went back to the homestead more than once over the following months. Each time the sisters stood there like statues carved from stone. 6 black shapes standing in a row, their faces pale as candle wax melting. Always the same answers repeated like a script. "No sheriff, ain't seen nobody. No sheriff, we keep to ourselves." And they did keep to themselves completely. No trips to town, no church attendance, no trading face-to-face with anyone. But their baskets and quilts still showed up regularly in the drop spot, neat as ever, as if nothing was wrong. And inside those neat baskets, Delmore began to notice disturbing things. A stain faint and brown on the reed of one basket. A loose thread in a quilt that was not wool or cotton. It was coarse and darker like something shaved off a human scalp. Delmore burned those findings in his fireplace. He did not tag them as evidence. He did not bag them properly. He did not send them to Knoxville for testing. Why? Maybe he was scared of what they would confirm. Maybe he knew the truth deep down and could not carry it to where it would lead. Or maybe, and this is what some people believe to this day, the mountain had him in its grip by then, the same way it held the sisters. Because when a 5th person vanished without explanation, Delmore did not ride out to investigate. He stayed in his office, staring out the window like a man waiting for a storm he could not stop. By the winter of 1928, the missing numbered 6 people in total. 6 souls gone without a trace, except for whispers spreading through town, except for the dolls that kept appearing. Yes, the dolls. They kept turning up in strange places. One was nailed to a tree on the old ridge trail. Another was found sitting upright on a stump near the drop spot, its blank face turned toward the path like it was waiting patiently for someone specific. Every doll looked the same, carved from mountain pine wood, stuffed with moss, dressed in scraps of real clothing. And always, there was a token of the missing person, a button, a strip of fabric. Once, there was even a wedding ring tied around a wooden wrist with string. The people of Cades Cove started locking their doors in broad daylight. They started crossing themselves when they heard an owl hoot. And when night came down heavy over the ridges, they told their children what their grandparents had told them years before. Do not wander into Wye Hollow. Do not look too long at the trees when you pass by. And if you see a doll in the woods, do not touch it. Do not even breathe near it. But silence remained the law of the land. and the sisters kept their lamps burning on the mountain like 6 black candles against the dark, sending up smoke signals that no one could read. Next, we descend into the chilling winter of 1929, when the truth clawed closer to the surface and blood seeped through the snow. By the turn of 1929, Walhalla was no longer just a place you could point to on a map. It had become a presence, something you could feel pressing down on you. The fear had settled like thick frost on every porch in Cades Cove. Doors were barred and locked at sunset every single night. Guns stayed loaded and within reach. Folks walked to church in groups, keeping their heads down, muttering prayers low under their breath. But fear does not stop hunger. And when winter came that year, the kind of brutal winter that cracks timber and kills livestock in the fields men had to hunt to survive, the first to vanish was a man named Asa Bennett. He was 41 years old, a tough ridge farmer, the kind of man who could skin a bear before breakfast without breaking a sweat. On January the 14th, he left his cabin with a rifle and a pack of salt pork. He told his worried wife he would bring back venison by nightfall. She waited 3 long nights for him. When the snow started falling again, heavy and thick, she sent for the sheriff in a panic. Delmore went out this time, but not alone. He brought 2 deputies and a local tracker with him. They followed Asa's trail up into Y Hollow through black timber and ice-choked streams. The prince went straight as an arrow toward the Walker place. Then halfway there, the prince just stopped. They stopped in the middle of the white snow. No drag marks, no signs of struggle, no blood, like the mountain had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. Then the dogs found something that made everyone's blood run cold. Not Asa, not his gun. A doll. It was nailed to a fallen pine tree, its arms spread wide like it had been crucified. Its face was gouged out completely, just a hollow black hole where features should have been. And around its wooden neck hung Asa's leather hunting strap, the buckle crusted with fresh blood. The deputies wanted to turn back immediately and leave. Delmore did not. He pressed forward. They went on, right up to the Walker cabin itself. What they saw there burned into the tracker's mind so badly that he never spoke above a whisper after that day for the rest of his life. 6 sisters were standing on the porch in the falling snow. They stood there in their black dresses and boots, completely silent, perfectly still, just watching the men approach. Their faces were pale as bone, and their eyes, the tracker said their eyes were empty, like looking into a deep well with no bottom. Delmore asked them questions about Asa. They never blinked once. No, sheriff, ain't seen nobody. No, sheriff, we keep to ourselves. And then something happened, something that sent the deputies running in terror, leaving Delmore behind alone. The sisters laughed, all at once. 6 voices, thin as wire, cutting through the trees like wind howling through a dead forest. The deputies saw later it was not just laughter they heard. There were words hidden inside the laughter. Words they could not quite hear clearly, but could feel crawling under their skin like insects. They left Delmore standing there. He came back down at dusk, alone, his face white as snow, his lips cracked and bleeding. He said absolutely nothing about what happened after the deputies fled. He filed no report. He just locked his office door and drank whiskey for 3 straight days. And then, 3 nights later, Asa's wife woke to a sound on her porch. She opened the door and screamed so hard that neighbors heard her 2 ridges over. There on the porch sat Asa's rifle, leaned carefully against the rail, neat as you please. And tied to the stock with rawhide was something worse than any body could have been. A doll. This one was painted red from head to toe, dripping with what looked like fresh paint or blood.